In 80 Days, adventurer and award-winning filmmaker Paul G. Roberts retraces the global footsteps of Phileas Fogg, hero of Jules Verne's most famous work.
And today, the first part of my pilgrimage to follow Phileas Fogg's track around the world is the rail journey from London to Paris. Leaving from St Pancras Station, I'm taking the Eurostar, which cuts a big amount of travel from heading to airports and waiting in lounges and security by simply jumping in a locomotive, or a modern locomotive, and heading under the Channel, or as the French call it, La Manche, and arriving in Paris fresh and refreshed in just under 2 hours 30. So now the journey begins. I'm in London, heading on to the first form of transportation in my 80 Days series. Traveling from London to Paris via rail, via the Eurail. As I'm speeding through the English countryside on the way to Paris in the Eurostar. The trip to the railway station going through the heart of London had me thinking about the class system that was and is. I guess class today is very much all about economics and wealth. And going through the areas of Knightsbridge, Mayfair, Westminster, seeing all the designer boutiques that you have in every other major international city. But there's a lot of people buying them, and there's a lot of luxury car retail outlets all through the place. If you remember the story of Oliver Twist, by Charles Dickens, a very famous book of his, that's been made into many movies and series over a lifetime. It was all about the time of child labour and exploitation. which was really terrible back then. They had kids working down mines and smelting plants on docks, 16 hours a day, making virtually nothing, exposed to very dangerous, hard and tedious work. And it was the time of the poorhouse, and if you couldn't pay your debts, you were put in some kind of jail. Fortunately, a series of factory acts from the 1830s onwards started to clamp down on that, progressively limited the amount of hours that women and children specifically could be endured to work. But any attempts to organise labour were banned by law late until the centuries. For the rich, they had luxuries, and they had a lot of things. But luxuries weren't available to the millions of working poor, who toiled, as I said, for long hours in mills, in mines, in smelting plants, in factories, and on docks. The dreadful working and living conditions of the early 19th century persisted in many areas until the end of the Victorian Age, which was the Edwardian Age, and the dark shadow of the workhouse loomed over the unemployed and destitute. Must have seemed like a holiday being sent to a penal colony like Australia in those days. As we rocket through the French countryside, I've been thinking about the last time I was in Paris. It was 7 years ago. I'd been in America and Costa Rica for a holiday and flew Swiss Air from Miami to Zurich. And then as part of the special deal you had with that particular business class airfare, they gave you a side stop in Europe for free. So I thought, well, I can't miss that. What about I go to Paris? So with the tight schedule I had, I literally had time to go from Zurich to Paris for a day and a half, which is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I got into Paris from Zurich, must have been about 8:30 in the morning. I was so jet lagged from coming from Miami that all I could do is go to my room, run a bath. I think I half fell asleep before I got in the bath, and then had a sip of some cognac, which was in the room, in the bar fridge. Then passed out, got up the next morning, got in a taxi, then flew back to Zurich. The dumbest idea I ever had. Jet lag is a real thing. And we've just arrived in Paris, Gare du Nord train station, off a very civilized way to come to Paris. Now, according to Greek mythology, Paris, while he was still a shepherd, was chosen by Zeus to determine which of the three goddesses was the most beautiful. Rejecting bribes of kingly power from Hera and the military might of Athena, he chose Aphrodite and accepted her bribe to help him win the most beautiful woman alive. Paris was also the name of the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, who eloped with Helen, Queen of Sparta, thus causing the events that led to the Trojan War. But today, Paris, even the name, the word, gives people chills, goosebumps. It's known around the world as the City of Love. It's the stuff of legend, and without doubt, the epicenter of the world of art, beauty, gastronomy, and fashion. The Paris of which we fantasize, its bohemians milling around late-night cafes, in the shadows of palaces and luxurious galleries, they can still be found. But the real Paris is more than just this projection. Beyond the limelight is a sprawling metropolis that extends well beyond the elegant boulevards of the city centre. It's first and foremost the nation's capital, where most of its financial activity has taken place, where its politics has been shaped over hundreds of years. Tourists flock to the city on the Seine in their droves. It's the most visited city in all of the world. People go there seeking an elusive, imagined Paris that lives a set of images, carelessly flicked cigarettes, rock star philosophers debating, the smell of freshly baked bread and baguettes wafting from the baskets of passing bicyclettes. Beauty in all things. It has it all. Visitors come to revel in the elegance of the urban, where artistry can be found in almost every corner. They hope to sample just a hint of the irresistible city that provided the sustenance and the setting for works such as Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers and Victor Hugo's Les Miserables.
You let me go free?
Free? When is a man free? I wish someone would tell me. Yes, you can go, Jean. And this time, Jean, don't forget to take your candlesticks with you.
You give them to me?
Long ago, Jean, I learned that life is to give, not to take. Let me give. And in return, promise me that you will give also.
In many ways, we're attached to the idea of a Paris, the city that storied Belle Epoque, the Ville Lumière, or City of Light, originally derived for its celebrated luminaries. We imagine a city home to one of the oldest universities in the world, the Sorbonne, whose sophistication, beauty, and dizzying splendor, from the gasping Gothic and opulent Baroque to the soaring modern and mind-bending postmodern, that's attracted artists, philosophers, and poets and intellectuals for centuries. As you gaze up at the Eiffel Tower, at the red windmill of the Moulin Rouge, or at the paintings that adorn the walls of the Musée d'Orsay, we are grasping for those seductive years of the Belle Epoque. Between 1880 and the outbreak of the First World War, the tumults of French politics seemed to abate, and Paris became the world's North Star, the place of possibilities and dreams. Automobiles were appearing on the streets, and the city was lit by tens of thousands of gas lamps. And Auguste and Louis Lumière were showing the very first films in history. In the whirlwind, free-thinking fervour, Paris drove art's evolution, from Impressionism and Modernism to Art Nouveau and Art Deco, from Vincent van Gogh and Paul Cézanne to Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso. Eric Satie played his minimalist melodies on a piano in Montmartre as the can-can, set to Offenbach's music. It was danced at cabarets and music halls around Paris, distinctive boulevards, squares and parks, recently designed by Georges Eugene Haussmann. To open the 1889 World Fair, Gustave Eiffel built the world's tallest structure, a wrought iron lattice tower topped with hundreds of gaslights, beaming out the tricolor, the flag of France. And quite literally, this was the city and the nation of lights. Paris borrows its name from the Parisi, a Celtic tribe that established a settlement here in the 3rd century BC on what is now the Ile de la Cité. In time, the Romans built a town here and called it Lutetia, Latin for mid-water dwelling. And Roman rule finally ended in the 5th century with the arrival of the Franks. And in 508 AD, Frankish king Clovis I united Gaul as a kingdom and made Paris the capital, naming it after the original Parisi tribe. Now, Paris prospered during the Middle Ages, and in the 12th century, construction began on the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The work would continue for another 200 years, while the marshy Marais district north of the Seine was drained and settled to become what it's now known as the Right Bank. The Sorbonne University opened its doors in 1252. The beautiful Sainte-Chapelle was consecrated in 1248, and the venerable Louvre Museum got its start as a riverside fortress around 1200. Yes, as with England or London, Paris's history included a heavy Vikings chapter. Scandinavian Vikings, known as the Norsemen or Normans, began raiding France's western coast in the 9th century. And after 3 centuries of conflict, they started their push towards Paris. These conflicts gave birth to the 100 Years' War between Norman England and Paris's Capetian dynasty, eventually resulting in the defeat of the French at Agincourt in 1415 and English control over Paris in 1420. In 1429, a 17-year-old girl called Jeanne d'Arc re-rallied the French troops to defeat the English at Orleans. And with the exception of Calais area north of Paris, the English were expelled from Paris, France, for good by 1453. The Renaissance period moved forward at the end of the 1400s, and many of the city's signature buildings and monuments sprang up during this period. By the late 16th century, Paris again was up in arms, this time in the name of religion. Clashes between the Huguenot Protestants and the Catholics sank to their darkest levels in 1572 with the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 3,000 Huguenots who were in town to celebrate the wedding of Henri Navarre, King Henry IV. In 1643, at the tender age of 5, Louis XIV, the Sun King, ascended to the throne and held the French crown all the way till 1715. And during his reign, the national treasury was almost bankrupted to aggressive wars abroad and even more colossal spending at home. His most tangible legacy is the Palace of Versailles, 23 kilometres southwest of France. And whatever the ups and downs of the French monarchy, they found a way to support the American Revolution with money and arms. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the excesses of Louis XVI, the Sun King's great-great-great-grandson, and his capricious queen, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake, led to an uprising of Parisians on July 14th, 1789. The citizens stormed the Bastille prison, kick-starting the French Revolution. The populist ideals of the revolution's early stages gave way to what became known as the Reign of Terror, wherein many of the original patriots got uncomfortably closey with Madame la Guillotine. The unstable post-revolution government was consolidated in 1799 under a young Corsican general known as Napoleon Bonaparte, who adopted the title First Consul. In 1804, the Pope crowned him Emperor of the French, and Napoleon proceeded to sweep most of Europe under his thumb. Napoleon's hunger for conquest led to his eventual defeat, first in Russia in 1812, and later at Waterloo with the British, Belgium in 1815. Napoleon's legacy, however, was not one solely of defeat, as the modern French legal system is based on his approach to government, and many monuments, such as the massive Arc de Triomphe, were built as a result of his leadership.
El Army.
Now, following Napoleon's second exile, after his final defeat of Waterloo, France faltered under a string of mostly inept rulers until a coup d'etat in 1851 brought a new emperor to power. And guess who? It was Napoleon's own nephew, Napoleon III. During the 17 years of his rule, he oversaw the construction of a flashy new Paris with wide presidential boulevards, sculptured parks, and not insignificantly, a modern sewer system that would help prevent things like the plague happening again. Napoleon III and his civic planner, Baron Haussmann, gave us Paris we see today, for the most part. Almost all of the medieval Paris was eradicated, but bits of it remain in pockets, mostly in the Marais neighbourhood and in a section preserved inside the grounds of the Louvre. Like his namesake uncle, however, this Napoleon and his penchant for pugnacity led to a costly and eventually unsuccessful war, this time with the Prussians in 1870. And when news of their emperors captured by the enemy reached Paris, the masses took to the streets to demand that a republic be created. And despite its bloody beginnings, the Third Republic ushered in the glittering halcyon days of the Belle Epoque. Now, the Belle Epoque was a golden time for Paris, famed for its Art Nouveau architecture and a barrage of advances in the arts and sciences. By the 1930s, Paris had become a worldwide centre for the artistic and avant-garde, and in a way became the capital for free-thinking intellectuals. The era was cut short, however, by the Nazi occupation of 1940, and Paris remained under Germany's rule until August 25, 1944. The Allied forces that retook the city were spearheaded by Free French units in order to give the French the honour of liberating their capital. After the war, Paris regained its position as a creative hotbed, nurtured a revitalised liberalism that reached a crescendo in the student-led Spring Uprising of 1968, their own kind of flower power. The Sorbonne University was occupied, barricades were erected in the Latin Quarter, and some 9 million people nationwide were inspired to join in a paralysing general strike, drawing attention to their increasing dissatisfaction with the rigidity of French institutions. It was during the 1980s that French President Mitterrand initiated the Futur Grands Projets, a series of ambitious building projects that garnered widespread approval, even when the results were sometimes popular failures. Responses to the flashier examples, like the Centre Pompidou and the glass pyramid in the Louvre, have ranged from the appalled "Mon Dieu" to rapture. And if nothing else, the projet invigorated dialogue about the Parisian aesthetic and have added to the storied history of Paris. Now, Paris elegance survives into the current day, thanks to the aggressive preservation efforts, but also looks to the future with a huge expansion and improvement of the metro system to be finished by 2030, and with the rededication of pedestrian and bike-friendly policies that will hopefully take some of the traffic out of the city.